Greetings YouTube, Tim Kirk here again, and today we're going to be talking about the Mutant Epoch role-playing game. And I might cram another small game in at the end, not because Mutant Epoch doesn't deserve the attention, but because it does not have a lot of unique meat to it to discuss. It's got some very good ideas, don't mistake me. It has some very nice systems for gameplay, but it has some problematic ones, and I'm not sure that that will take a whole 15 minutes or however long this video runs. Now, Mutant Epoch has fairly small print. It is a fairly decent-sized booklet, about a half-inch or so in paperback, and with the small print means it packs a fairly complete game in a fairly small package. The character generation can be very random, and that is in some ways good, in some ways bad. And good in that it creates unique characters, but bad in the fact that the character power level, despite having levels for characters, the actual physical abilities and mental abilities of the characters can blow the curve of being a first level character in the game. And that is problematic because you roll your characters background race, you might say, whether they're pure strain human, a cyborg, a ghost mutant, a freakish mutant. Ghost mutants being those that you can't detect as mutants by simple examination. Bioengineered humans, engineered humanoid animals, and the like. Now, because you roll that, it determines your attribute scores, which can be rolled or can be points assigned, depending on your race or the GM's choice. That kind of reins in some of the power, but not much of it, because you then roll your cast, and your cast determines your skills, and your skills can impact how much gear you get because of what cast you're from. And this means that a character can be a freakish mutant with a lot of mutant powers, no real defects necessarily, you know, one or two, maybe a few more, but nothing that really detracts from the character because they look freakish or something, because people don't really care if their character's hideously ugly a lot of the time. And these great mutations, great gear, and lots of skills, while you can have a pure strain human who is a slave, whose best thing is he's got a club and no skill specialty to use it. Now, don't mistake me, skills are not this very traditional skill list. You have skills that modify your chances of things slightly. They apply to a chart, which is the primary chart in the game, called the hazard table. And the hazard table compares the difficulty, A to Z, of a hazard to your effective ability and gives you a percentage chance to succeed. And that's fairly decent. I mean, it's not giving you like a 10% chance. It's giving you fairly good numbers to roll under, which is a good thing and makes the game actually very playable. But many of the randomly rolled characters that we tried out could wipe the floor with anything in the bestiary that we threw against them. So I would have to create custom monsters for those characters, and not all the characters ended up that powerful. So despite having a level system which should rein that in a little bit, it really didn't because of the randomness of the system. Now, in some ways it's a good idea because it allows people to play different characters at different times. If one dies, they'll play something completely different the next time, hopefully. They won't get the exact same random rolls. Most of the mutations in the game either are limited by effectiveness, like range because they're melee attacks, or because they're just modifications to the body, or if they're very powerful, they only have so many uses a day per character level, which is a functional and very manageable way of handling it. The primary antagonist of the game, besides the crazy mutants out in the wilderness and all the mutant animals, are robots, which seem to have been a big part of their background, is that robots and androids and the like are antagonistic to the main humanity that remains. Interesting idea. It's a very wahoo post-apocalyptic game. Not quite as far as Gamma World, about the same as Waste World, but interesting all the same. It's got its own stories to tell and its own interesting little nooks and crannies. It's got some wonderful charts, for example, for stuff you pick up as loot, and the dangers of looking for loot on dead corpses. It also has some really, really good information on, like, it's just little lists of things like, here's a good location to have an adventure, and here's a good starting idea for an adventure, like protect this person, and it happens at an abandoned computer facility. And those things can be used as tools that can create some interesting ideas for a GM. Now, it is really packed with this kind of stuff. It's very good in that way, and they produce supplements such as magazines, more adventures, probably other books. I only have the core rule book. I haven't looked into the other stuff other than the free downloads, which makes the game quite usable for those people who need more than one core book. I do not tend to. I usually stick with the core rule books for most games. In fact, I think the only role-playing game, or two role-playing games I have many supplements for, are the Providence RPG and Shadowrun 4th edition RPG, which just are the ones that hooked me and I kept buying books for. Once upon a time it was different, but nowadays it's like, if you give me a good core book, I will run away with it, and only buy supplements if you really inspire me with the supplements. Now, Mutant Epoch inspires me, but not enough to go out and buy a lot more rule books for it. If I were running a regular campaign of it, I might do that, but it's a might, a very, very slim might in this case, because I feel that the core book is so wonderful and so packed with information that you don't need a lot more, or shouldn't. Now, despite the hazard table and its functionality, combat is based on character level modified slightly by skills. Everybody has a starting 50% chance to hit before modifiers, which is an interesting and unique way of handling it, because that gives everybody roughly the same combat prowess to start with before you start throwing mutant powers at it. And it also creates a small problem, because the amount of damage a character can do is not reined in. In fact, I rolled up several characters for the game and had characters with cybernetic missile launchers on one arm. Yeah, they don't have a lot of rockets, but for those first few combats, if they use them, they're going to be effective. And one PC that we played had a laser rifle, which actually had way more shots and did fairly decent damage. And that breaks the curve of some of the monsters in the back, in that I would throw things at the group I ran, and they would be wiped out. Like, I sent a horde of ants, and they wiped these horde of ants out pretty quickly. Now, I'm sure I could have overswarmed them with hundreds of ants, but you have to have a trade-off between, giant ants in an area, only so many of them can swarm a PC, plus, let's be honest, the more things you pack against a game, the higher the chances that somebody's going to get lucky and do a critical hit and kill somebody. The game has critical hits. It has misses. There's certain numbers that are always a miss and always a hit. It works fairly well in play. I'm not going to recommend it over something like Gamma World or Waste World or Atomic Highway, but if you're looking for a fairly traditional rules game that does post-apocalyptic percentile system, it's a very nice game. Might be worth picking up. I can't say that it stands out among all the post-apocalyptic games I have as having something unique or interesting to say, but I can't say that it fades into the back and doesn't do anything interesting. It does do quite a few things, and there's so much information in the core book, and with the support it is getting, it may be worthwhile for quite a few people out there. I like it. On the surface, it really inspired me to sit down and go, I'm going to run this, and I'm going to run this for everybody. And I did, and was disappointed in the actual results of play. Now, you may not be. It may be the perfect post-apocalyptic game for you, so I would suggest looking into it at least, reading some preview information, and, maybe picking it up if you feel that you want to add another game to your collection to use. I'm one of these gamers that really will not encourage you to get a game unless you're going to use it. If you just want to read it, I can't say that it's worthwhile. Games should be played, not just read. Now, there are good games out there and quite a few games that are worth reading, but I'm much more of I'm going to sit down and play this game. Mutant Epoch was playable. It wasn't perfect. It could use a few fixes. Maybe someday we'll get a second edition that recognizes the disconnect here between damage and chances to hit a little bit. and make sure the monsters are a little buffer in the back of the book. I hear good things about the modules, which is not necessarily my kind of thing. I tend to write my own adventures, but you know, it's worth taking a look. Since I still have some time left, I will bring up, if I have it, hang on just a second. This one, Sorcery and Super Science. It says, very simple, after the cracking of the moon and before the rise of Atlantis, the world was a place strange to the thoughts of honest men. And it basically uses a bit of preview material that says it's inspired by Thundar the Barbarian, which, as a post-apocalyptic fan and a fan of cartoons, Thundar the Barbarian was one of the best cartoons I ever watched in terms as a kid, and I still enjoy it today because they finally released DVDs of it. Sorcery and Super Science takes a very little inspiration from it, and that is probably my biggest disappointment with this game, is it doesn't have enough inspiration. It has sorcerers, it has magic, it has a variety of you know, mutants and etc, etc, etc. It is also a very slim module-sized game. It too has small print, but there's not much here. There's rules for creating characters, there's rules for running the characters, running their gear. There's not much in terms of setting information, although there is a little bit of just brainstorm ideas on the back, and a map of the United States afterwards, which is kind of interesting because it's actually flooded my below sea level home area down here near the bottom of the edge of this waterway in Texas. It's got a very strange system, and the strange system requires strange dice that most of us don't have. You're going to need a full set that includes D7s and D16s, because the mechanics of Sorcery and Super Science are you add an opponent's stat to your stat, modified by a few things, and that gives you the die you roll and your target number, which means if they have a 7 and you have a 7, you've got a 14, so you roll the closest thing you have to a D14, which is probably a D16. They make them, but I don't have one. I don't really want to go out and buy one. And frankly, I heard good things about this game, and there's just not enough substance there to make it worth recommending. It's got some neat ideas. I like the classes, as it were, because you have the Catalyst, which kind of loosely, if you squint, could be covered Thundar. You have the Sorcerer, which is, of course, you know, Ariel, and you have the Mutation, the Mutant Masters, which could be whatever. But the mutant powers, the Sorcery is the same. Sorcery is just mutant powers, except you get these things called Whispers, and the Whispers are sort of occult secrets that let you talk to almost supernatural deific forces that give you special spells. And you don't get them quickly, and those are about the only things that are inspired by Thundar. There's one of those that's inspired by Thundar, and the cracking of the moon is inspired by Thundar, and that's it. It really does not include a lot of ideas from Thundar, which, considering its name, considering its catchline, is very drawing on the nostalgia of people like me who are Thundar fans. It really should have more Thundar in it. I know copyright issues, IP issues, I get that, but it is possible to write such a game around Thundar's idea without necessarily stepping on the IP and still doing a creative, interesting, substantial game. It's cheap. It is functional, but not very interesting or creative. Not saying it's not got good ideas. It does have good ideas, but it is not. It doesn't take the material what little material it has in this little core book and run with it, and it's just not worth recommending. I would probably avoid it if it weren't so cheap. I picked it up because I had a little extra money and thought, hey, I would like to do another post-apocalyptic role-playing game review, but there isn't even enough to fit in a full-length video. Mutant Epoch I could have kept talking about, but I would probably just run in circles. Sorcery and Super Science, there's just not enough there, and that's a shame.